Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanechari Jamuna Tira Vanechari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Stottara Swata Sri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakacharya Stottara Swata Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki. Jayam Vishnupad Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Satchinand Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sakho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki. Sri Sri Radha Krishna Gopi Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dham Ki. Mathura Dham Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Mai Ki Jai. Yamuna Mai Ki. Tulsi Devi Ki. Bhakti Devi Ki. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Today's verse is from continuing Canto 10. We just finished the deliverance of Manigriv and Nalakuvera, and now we're on chapter 12 in Canto 10, which leads up to the killing of the demon Aghasura. So there's 2 verses today. Verse 4 has no purport, so we'll chant verse 5. Mushnanto nyonyas... Oh, sorry. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. No. Okay. Mushnanto nyonyasikhyadin gyatan aratscha chiksipu gyatan aratscha chiksipuhu tatra tyascha punardurad tatra tyascha punardurad dasantascha punardaduhu dasantahascha punardaduhu mushnanto nyonyasikhyadin gyatan aratscha chiksipuhu tatra tyascha punardurad dasantascha punardaduhu mushnanto nyonyasikhyadin gyatan aratscha chiksipuhu tatra tyascha punardurad dasantascha punardaduhu. Mushnanto nyonyasikhyadin gyatanaratcha chiksipuhu tapratascha punardurad santascha punardaduhu. Hare Krishna. Everybody finished. Okay, translation. By Srila Prabhupada. All the cowherd boys used to steal one another's lunch bags. When a boy came to understand that his bag had been taken away, the other boys would throw it further away to a more distant place. And those standing there would throw it still further. When the proprietor of the bag became disappointed, the other boys would laugh. The proprietor would cry, and then the bag would be returned. All the cowherd boys used to steal one another's lunch bags. When a boy came to understand that his bag had been taken away, the other boys would throw it further away to a more distant place. And those standing there would throw it still further. When the proprietor of the bag became disappointed, the other boys would laugh. The proprietor would cry, and then the bag would be returned. All the cowherd boys used to steal one another's lunch bags. When a boy came to understand that his bag had been taken away, the other boys would throw it further away to a more distant place, and those standing there would throw it still further. When the proprietor of the bag became disappointed, the other boys would laugh, the proprietor would cry, and the bag would be returned. And text 4, which is also part of today's verse. I'll just read through it. Although all these boys were already decorated by their mothers with ornaments of kacha, gunja, pearls, and gold, when they went into the forest, they further decorated themselves with fruits, green leaves, bunches of flowers, peacock feathers, and soft minerals. And there's no purport to this verse, but I'll just read it again. Although all these boys were already decorated by their mothers with ornaments of kacha, gunja, pearls, and gold, when they went into the forest, they further decorated themselves with fruits, green leaves, bunches of flowers, peacock feathers, and soft minerals. And the next one was, all the cowherd boys used to steal one another's lunch bags. When a boy came to understand that his bag had been taken away, the other boys would throw it further away, to a more distant place, and those standing there would throw it still further. When the proprietor of the bag became disappointed, the other boys would laugh, the proprietor would cry, and then the bag would be returned. Purport by His Divine Grace Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This kind of playing and stealing among boys still exists even in the material world, because this kind of sporting pleasure is present in the spiritual world, from which this idea of enjoyment emanates. Janmad Asya Yataha, Vedanta-Sutra 1.1.2. This same enjoyment is displayed by Krishna and his associates in the spiritual world. But there the enjoyment is eternal, whereas here, in the material platform, it is temporary. There the enjoyment is Brahman, whereas here the enjoyment is Jada. The Krishna consciousness movement is meant to train one how to transfer oneself from the Jada to the Brahman, because human life is meant for this purpose. Athato Brahma Jigyasa, Vedanta-Sutra 1.1.1. Krishna comes down to teach us how we can enjoy with him on the spiritual platform in the spiritual world. Not only does he come, but he personally displays his pastimes in Vrindavan and attracts people to spiritual enjoyment. That ends the purport by Srila Prabhupada. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narotamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato dayo mudirayat. Nastrapayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhaktir bhavati nashtiki. Bhaktir bhavati. Okay. Nastrapayeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavat yutamash loke bhaktir bhavati nashtiki. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. In the Namo Vishnuvara Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Jaya Pataka Swami Sinamane. Okay. In text 4, it describes how the boys were beautifully decorated by their mothers with ornaments of kacha, gunja, pearls, and gold. And they went into the forest. They were further decorated themselves with fruits, green leaves, bunches of flowers, peacock feathers, and soft minerals. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, enjoyment in the spiritual world is Brahman. There the enjoyment is Brahman. Whereas the same enjoyment is displayed by Krishna and his associates in the spiritual world. But there the enjoyment is eternal. Whereas here on the material platform, it is temporary. So it's very interesting that on the eternal platform, the boys were dressed by their mother, which means if they've got a mother, they must have been young at one time. And also they were dressed in the morning. So how can that be an eternal pleasure? Because it's passing with time. So it's not, these are not light statements Srila Prabhupada is making. It sounds good to say there, the pleasure is eternal, here it's temporary. Here the temporary nature of this world is you get dressed in the morning and then it's gone and you get dressed the next morning. Here we see how beautifully the boys were dressed by their mothers in the morning, and then they do more things. So what does it mean to say that the enjoyment, the pleasure is eternal? So I'm not going to answer that, but I'm just going to say that the very first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam in the first canto is taken from the Vedanta-Sutra, which is the philosophical scripture of the Vedas, and it approaches spiritual life from you'd almost say a speculative point of view, by analyzing the material world, trying to understand what is spirit and what is matter. And spiritual understanding should be based on common sense. There should be some intelligence behind it, not just a story of some children going and having a party and decorating themselves with flowers. And Srila Prabhupada, that's why Srimad Bhagavatam, one is supposed to work one's way through all the 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, so that one doesn't have a misunderstanding when one comes to hear these pastimes, of taking them in the wrong sense. So at least one can have 2 understandings that are acceptable. One is one can philosophically understand that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and have realization of the eternal nature of his pastimes as opposed to the material nature of enjoyment in the material world. Or on the other hand, one can approach it by saying, well, I accept what Prabhupada is saying here. I accept that this is actually the highest understanding given in the Vedas, but I don't understand it myself. Maybe one day later I will. But what one shouldn't do is take these as being activities as we do, that these are coward boys on a different planet, getting up in the morning, getting dressed by their mothers and going out. It's the understanding of these pastimes is on a whole different level to that. And if we got faith that is correct, then we get access to the pastimes. That you need some intellectual humility to be able to get entrance. Just like if you go into the house of, if we go and meet someone who's vastly more intelligent than us, or vastly more wealthy than us, whatever, if we want to keep their company, we must have some sort of humility, not be belligerent. So to accept, that's why devotees who are chanting the rounds, who are following principles, have got the humility to be able to get access to these wonderful Srimad Bhagavatam. And Srila Prabhupada did actually say about his Krishna books, he was very pleased with them because he translated them early on because he wanted to make sure that if he passed away, at least this Krishna book would be available to his disciples. So at the same time, you're not supposed to read the 10th canto, which is Krishna book. You're not supposed to read that until you've actually assimilated the other 9 cantos. So Srila Prabhupada was very delighted with the work when it was finished, because it was written in such a way, and Srila Prabhupada considered that Krishna was dictating to him, and it was Krishna's writing himself. And it was written in such a way, he said, that you can put this in the hands of a sexmonger and they will not make the error of thinking this is a mundane, or make the error of thinking this is a story about girls and boys getting together and ordinary sex life, because it is so threaded through with all the philosophy of Vedanta-Sutra, crammed into every purport, even in Krishna book, it's just there everywhere, that no sooner can your mind go an inch away from the pages, the meaning of Srimad Bhagavatam, but Srila Prabhupada is right there to bring us back. And here in this purport, he straight away does it again. We've read the verse, was all the cowherd boys used to steal one another's lunch bags. When a boy came to understand that his bag had been taken away, the other boys would throw it further. So that's actually fun. To a more distant place, it gets better. And those standing there would throw it still further. So we're already caught up in the story, because we'll experience this. I mean, my thought is immediately, are the big boys always taking the same small boy's bag and throwing it away, or sometimes do the big boys' bags get taken away by the small boys and thrown further? And are they likely to cry if they don't get it back? I mean, this did pass through my head, having been to school myself. When the proprietor of the bag became disappointed, the other boys would laugh, the proprietor would cry, and the bag would be returned. In my situation, sometimes the bag didn't come back. So Prabhupada immediately comes in with the purport, which is Vedanta-Sutra in a nutshell. You can't escape it. This kind of plane, because we are thinking, this plane is like what we do, or what we did. Srila Prabhupada reverses that, because that is the way people take it. This sex life that Krishna is having, it's like the sex life we have. But Prabhupada straight away reverses. The kind of playing and stealing among boys still exists, even in the material world, because this kind of sporting pleasure is present in the spiritual world, from which the idea of enjoyment emanates us. So it puts us completely on the back foot now. And even great philosophers like Plato, he said somewhere in the spiritual realm there is a perfect table. It was his idea of a perfect table, because he says if it exists in this temporary world, there has to be something on which it is modeled, because it can't come from nothing. And that is philosophy. One of the problems with impersonal philosophy is that when one realizes Brahman, along with that realization, one gets relief from material suffering and an experience of bliss. And that realization that realization is so overwhelming, it minimizes the need to have for an intelligent analysis of the world. When you've got an experience which is as overwhelming as oneness with everything, it actually is sufficient and satisfying enough that one does not question reality anymore. And reality has to be questioned, because if what you're doing is not congruous with your experience, it won't last. So we have to think, if everyone is God, and we are God, and I've got that experience that I am God through being my meditation and my realization, I am experiencing a oneness. But you have to be able to question, well, wait a minute, if God is intelligent, I would never have let myself catch disease. I would have never let myself have to go to school again and again and again. I would know everything. I would never have to work hard for a living. So if I were God at any one stage in the past, I would not have let myself come to this foolish situation. But if I am Brahman realized, I will think I'm in a wonderful situation. It's all been illusion. And the enjoyment and the good feeling, the lack of material anxiety that one has when one has that Brahman realization closes that little bit of intelligence one has to think, what have I taken a different turn in my life? If I were God, would I leave my destiny to the toss of a coin, that here I am Brahman realized and happy, or there I could be starving as an old woman, dying alone, or whatever it is. So Brahman realization clouds the intelligence, but philosophy has to be led by the intelligence. And here Srila Prabhupada makes a very intelligent point. He says, the kind of playing and stealing exists here in the material world because, and that is a question that is not asked by people who are Brahman realized. They say, Jagan Mitya, Brahman Satya, Jagan Mritya. That's a very, that means this Brahman is eternal. The material world is temporary. And that's a very false. And that's a very easy way to shut down an argument. It's 4 words, it sounds good, it's a good sound bite, but when you think about material suffering, as all great spiritual leaders have, then it is meaningless. Because if Brahman is Satya and truth, then where has falsehood come from? Where has Mitya, Jagan Mitya, where does falsehood come from? So there must be another thing. So here in a real philosophy, it's inclusive of all experience, whether one is Brahman realized, whether one is in material life, whatever it is, the full picture, the full philosophical picture avoids the pitfall of just going for the pleasure, the immediate pleasure of Brahman, because it ignores the reality of individual experience that we have. And if most people are having that individual experience, and even in Brahman, people come out of that Brahman to talk about it as an individual. So that feeling of oneness, one is one with God and one is also separate from God, and one has to accept those 2 realities. So they become reconciled in the individual activities with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, loving exchanges with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Individual experience without the existence of God is just existence in the material sphere. Here Srila Prabhupada calls it jada. The enjoyment is eternal. Here on the material platform it is temporary. There the enjoyment is Brahman, whereas here the enjoyment is jada. So Srila Prabhupada talks about the enjoyment of Brahman as being the enjoyment of the individual in relationship with God. And here, the enjoyment in the material world is jada, the enjoyment of our material senses. So, very interestingly, Srimad Bhagavatam builds up to, here we have got stealing in the material world, traced back to activities in Krishna's pastimes, the boys, it's there with the boys there, it's reflected here in the material world. Then one comes to the very, very difficult situation of sex life. We have sex life in the material world, so how do you explain sex life in the spiritual world? That's a very, very difficult thing to do. And that is the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that we are supposed to follow in the footsteps of the gopis of Vrindavan. And how does one convey that across to an international audience to whom sex life is very much an addiction and often a very dirty activity? So Srila Prabhupada was especially proud of his Krishna book, because he said you could give this Krishna book, which describes Krishna's pastimes with the gopis and the most confidential rasa dance, and mentions Radharani by name, does so many different things, that, and it's all there in the Krishna book, that he says you can hand it to anyone, they will be able to understand it properly. And that is the mission of Lord Chaitanya. So in the very first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, here, in this particular verse, Srila Prabhupada quotes, he quotes two verses. The coward boys are stealing lunch bags. They're playing just like children. And if you feel that this is a material activity done by children, and they're just playing around and there's nothing special about Krishna, don't feel too bad. Lord Brahma made the same mistake. He learned his lesson. I think we'll come into that one later. And so it's not a hard mistake to make. And in this verse, Prabhupada invokes two big verses, two big quotes from Vedanta-Sutra. He doesn't say Brahman Satya Jagan Mritya. He says Janmadyasya Yataha, which is from Vedanta-Sutra 112. And he says Tato Brahma Jigyasa. Srila Prabhupada is throwing the heavy artillery at this verse. Two very heavy quotes. And that is because this verse has got so many things that we can misidentify with. Now if we go to the Srila Prabhupada's Srimad Bhagavatam, verse 1, chapter 1, canto 1, the very end of that, he actually does talk about sex life, which is the most difficult thing. If we're thinking, how come we've got such a difficult area to preach in? We're trying to be taken seriously as a religious movement, and here we are talking about the Supreme Personality of Godhead's sex life. So how can that come across? How can we preach it? Srila Prabhupada did it with amazing success. And he did it in many ways. But here, in a very nice bit from the 111, and this is of course related to this verse, because you can misunderstand the boys as just being ordinary boys stealing each other's lunch bags, and here you can misunderstand Krishna, the pastimes of Krishna being there. But just as there is sex life in this material world, it is a perverted reflection of a different sex life which exists spiritually. Here I'm just quoting from Canto 111. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur specifically deals with the original and pure sex psychology, adiras, devoid of all mundane inebriety. The whole material creation is moving under the principle of sex life. In modern civilization, sex life is a focal point for all activities. Wherever one turns his face, he sees sex life predominant. Therefore, sex life is not unreal. Its reality is experienced in the spiritual world. The material sex life is but a perverted reflection of the original fact. The original fact is in the absolute truth, and thus the absolute truth cannot be impersonal. It is not possible to be impersonal and contain pure sex life. Consequently, the impersonalist philosophers have given indirect impetus to the abominable mundane sex life because they have overstressed the impersonality of the ultimate truth. Consequently, man without information of the actual form of sex has accepted perverted material sex life as the all in all. There is a distinction between sex life in the diseased material condition and spiritual sex life. The Srimad Bhagavatam will gradually elevate the unbiased reader to the highest perfectional stage of transcendence. It will enable him to transcend the three modes of material activities: fruitive activities, speculative philosophy, and worship of functional deities, as inculcated in Vedic verses. So that was what Srila Prabhupada was aiming at. The aim of the ISKCON Hare Krishna movement is higher than the aim of Vedanta. It is directly connecting people who accept Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead through Srimad Bhagavatam to Him through devotional service. Now, so that was the philosophical part of the verse. Another part, I did actually listen to a video of Romapad Swami, Romapad Swami, giving a class on the same verse, and I'll tell you what he said. He was talking about the cowherd boys who were decorated by their mothers with ornaments of kusha, gunja, pearls, and gold. When they went into the forest, they were further decorated themselves with fruit, green leaves, bunches of flowers, peacock feathers, and soft minerals. And he was saying that they're already very nicely decorated by their mothers, so why would they decorate themselves with flowers and things like that? Single flowers, bunches of flowers. And he was describing how in Chaitanya Charitamrita, one time Srivas Thakur was with Lord Chaitanya, and Lord Jagannath was a bit tardy staying in the Gundicha temple, I believe. He was staying late, and his good wife, the goddess of fortune, was getting a little bit disturbed by this. So in order to bring him home quickly, she dressed herself up in all opulence, took her servants and her carrier, and went to call on her husband with all her entourage in great opulence to demand his speedy return. And possibly not in those words, but when Srivas saw the goddess of fortune, because he's Narada Muni and he's Vaikuntha man, he turned to Lord Chaitanya and said, "Is there anywhere in the world opulence like the goddess of fortune? Just look at her glory, look at her magnificence, and there's nothing that compare to this." And Lord Chaitanya put it to his associates, if I remember Ramapad Maharaj telling the story, and the comment was that, I've forgotten the exact words, but in Vrindavan, the opulence makes the opulence of Vaikuntha seem insignificant, even though apparently it is just a rural landscape, and with trees and flowers and water and that, its opulence far surpasses the opulence of Vaikuntha. And also in the book by Bhaktivinoda Thakur about Gopakumar, he also describes, as you go to different places in the spiritual world, the closer you get to Krishna, the more opulent it becomes. But it is a rural setting. So we've got that rural setting, but incredibly opulent. And Ramapad Maharaj was using this verse to praise Vaikuntha as more opulent, to praise Sri Vrindavan as more opulent even than Vaikuntha, even though Srivas Thakur, who was a Narada Muni, and also he was putting forward the case for the goddess of fortune's opulence being the greatest. Now, so I think Srila Prabhupada is, in every purport of Srimad Bhagavatam, in every verse, Srila Prabhupada is glorified. Just as Srila Vyasadeva is glorified in every reading of Srimad Bhagavatam also, as being the compiler of it, Srila Prabhupada is glorified by his brilliant understanding of the minds of everybody, that he knows exactly what people are going to get misled and he's pinpointing with the perfect purports those weaknesses and just dispensing of them in order to pull the curtain open on the wonderful verse we've just heard. So I'll leave it open if anybody's got any questions. I'll attempt to get someone else to answer them. Yeah.
My question is, if these activities are going on in the spiritual world, that they steal the lunch bag of a boy and the boy cries, you know, that's not bliss. You know, that's painful. So I thought the spiritual world was eternal and full of bliss. So where's the bliss? You know, people, if I go to the spiritual world, they're going to steal my lunch bag from me. It's very nice. I don't know if I want to go there now, if we're going to do that.
Yeah. So that's a wonderful question, and it's similar to my question of, do they always take the same little boy's lunch bag, and the big boys throw it away? There's a fundamental difference. Whereas crying in the spiritual world is even more blissful than stealing someone's lunch bag. And the difference is that in the spiritual world, whereas here we're always looking for affection, because here we meet dislike, and we meet affection, and then we meet dislike, and we meet affection, and all our reactions are coming from the relief of that negative feeling. Somebody's stolen my bag. Oh, I've got it back again, I'm happy. So our feelings of, generally, our feelings of happiness and distress are coming from our experience of good and bad in this world. So, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes a child will cry artificially in order to get something from his mother because he knows his mother loves him. So then he'll make a fuss. Or sometimes if there's a spiritual master, you see disciples going up because they know the spiritual master is affectionate, they will try and wheedle something out of it by barter. So in the spiritual world, happiness is not known due to the relief of misery. Happiness there is real. And when the boy's lunch bag is being stolen and he's crying, the boys there are not envious of him because they're taking his bag. They're not taking his bag because they want to make him suffer. There's a different motivation. Everyone there is not envious of each other. They're having fun. And because the little boy knows they want him to cry and Krishna wants him to cry so they can give it back and have him happy, therefore to please his friends and to please Krishna, because these people are transcendental, he knows he's going to eat that day, he cries. It's part of the pleasure. But our crying is a different crying. So they're crying, everyone is doing something, and they take his lunch bag to give him the chance to do some little bit of service. Okay, now you can cry and we'll give it back and we'll have fun throwing it, and you can cry and you can go back, and then it's your turn. So it's not based on envy, it's based on love. But it's very easy to understand, on the other hand. It's very easy for us to understand the verse before, and there's no purport to it, which is very, very, very crucial. The verse before describes their mothers decorated the boys with ornaments of pearls and gold. Now, that's not hard to understand, because we know our mothers do things for us. But it's when we come to things that, like a boy we can understand the happy part, but when we have something like stealing and crying, we need the purport. That's why the purport's there. But if we happen to understand the second one about how the boy crying is not suffering, and how stealing is not actually something evil there in the spiritual world, that means we also haven't understood the first one, why the mothers are giving the boys gold jewels and things like that. So but Prabhupada's not worried about that one, because he knows most people will be able to go over that. But now they'll hit a road bump with this. Boys are crying, so he puts the purport in there. But if we have difficulty understanding the second one, that means we certainly haven't understood the first one, but we've got a misunderstanding, but at least we got through it, we got some understanding of Vrindavan. That's pretty cool. So is that answer okay? Or do you have a better answer? You have a different one. Rajendrananda Prabhu?
What a wonderful class. Thank you, Prabhu. I'm glad we got to hear your understandings and nectar. Stirring the pot a little bit more, wonderful answer you just gave. And my mind went in the direction that the misconception lies with the definition of bliss, which you gave nice elaborate explanation about. Bliss we take to mean the peak of happiness of this world. And so we take it that one-sided. But the bliss, another way of saying what you just said, was it's based on love for Krishna and Krishna's pleasure. So whether one is separate from Krishna or with Krishna, or one is crying, with this pastime, or laughing, having gotten it back, it's all giving Krishna pleasure because it's all in love. The reciprocation between the boys in themselves and the boys and Krishna, it's all love. So bliss is really defined through the love and pleasure for Krishna, which you very nicely, elaborately.
Yeah, that's good. That's the point. That is the point, and that is the point. That ultimately it's about love, and that is the. If you go home, if you go home, say, when you go home, if you go home to your parents, you don't have to worry. Yeah? And that is love. It's not, you're with people who care about you. Even if you've got problems, you're with people who care about you. And with Krishna, they're with Krishna. They've got somebody who saves them from a demon every day. They've got somebody who plays all sorts of games with them. And I'm also wondering in the back of my mind, do they ever take Krishna's lunchbox? No one knows. I believe in the heavenly planet, Srimad Bhagavatam has many, many more volumes. So we probably find out if we go there. But so it is a good thing. And that's any questions there? Thank you, Rajendrananda Prabhu. That's nicely there. Yeah. Bliss as opposed to love. Yeah.
For us, like neophyte devotees, one new devotee, she's asking that I didn't go through the first 9 cantos of systematic study. Now we're discussing about the 10th canto. What kind of mentality I should listen and study from Sitala Devidas? Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's okay for devotees because she's accepted Krishna as a Supreme Personality of Godhead. So she's already surpassed and following and chanting. Then she'll be able to understand Srimad Bhagavatam 10th canto with Prabhupada's purports. Would you want to go again? Because she's accepted Krishna as a Supreme Personality of Godhead, she has already completed understood all of the Vedas. Because she's accepted Krishna as a Supreme Personality of Godhead and taken an initiation from a spiritual master, she has completed all study of the Vedas. Is that all right? Oh, you're talking. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And all we have to do is chant, dance, and take prasadam, and do some service. And hear Srimad Bhagavatam daily. It says, by regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam. It doesn't say what canto. For a devotee, any part of the Bhagavatam is nectar, because it's all about Krishna. And but if you for preaching, one should understand all of the books of Srila Prabhupada and be able to give them to others for preaching. But for a devotee, you can read any of Prabhupada's books with Prabhupada's purports. If Prabhupada was prepared to put Krishna book on the street in the hands of sex mongers, what to speak of a devotee chanting rounds reading the 10th canto? It's no problem at all. And Prabhupada's books are so well written, apart from you being able to study Canto 10, you can go out on the street and go to the meat area and the gambling area and the sex shop area and the drug-taking area of your town and give everybody Krishna book. And they'll all go back to Godhead. Special mercy. Hare Krishna.
More questions? Shall I ask more questions?
All right, one more. Please, yeah, please.
One devotee called Dust, he's asking, what is the purpose of a sexual life in the spiritual world? And in order to have Krishna conscious devotee, or do they need to have sex life, then they can have descendants?
Oh, thank you, yeah. That's an incredible, wonderful question. And that's a question everybody would have liked to ask, but we're afraid to. It's a very, very good question. So, I'm of the level that I don't know the answer to that, but I believe Srila Prabhupada knew the answer, and one day I will understand it. I do believe that no, I can't answer that properly. But with that understanding, I'm able to go through it. Would anybody else like to give that one a shot? It's a very good question. We've got some great devotees here. I'm not going to call them out by name, but they certainly know the answer. It's a question one doesn't want to attempt to answer, really, but it's such a good question. Can you give the question again? Is it written on there? Such a good question.
The question is, what is the purpose of sexual life in the spiritual world? In order to produce Krishna's devotees in the spiritual world, do they need sex life to produce descendants?
Right. So, okay. Gentlemen, hands up. Who's going to take that wonderful question? Wonderful question. Wonderful question. No, we got somebody to take the microphone. Good. Hare Krishna. It's Pankajangri Prabhu. I hope you can hear this online.
Well, here there's two reasons. One is pleasure and one is children in the material world. In the spiritual, because the genital in the material world has a pleasure coating, Prabhupada says. In the spiritual world, everything is pleasure coated. Everything is Satchit Ananda. So there's not one specific one thing that's going to give more pleasure than another. That will come in emotion, in ras. So there's no need for them for pleasure. So they, if they're married and they have children, then but I think Prabhupada said two things. I can't remember the quote. Prabhupada, with one quote, they don't have, in Vaikuntha, they don't have sex life.
Where?
In Vaikuntha.
Vaikuntha? They don't have.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Vaikuntha. Okay.
Another one, he said that if they have, there's no pregnancies. And but it appears in one description of Vaikuntha how the denizens are in their aeroplanes. They have the denizens
Other way, it's hard to hear, yeah.
Vaikuntha are in their aeroplanes. Everything is the atmosphere is designed for sense gratification. Everything is perfect. The breeze is perfect. The touch is perfect. The aroma in the breeze is perfect. Everything is perfect. They have beautiful bodies, strong bodies. There's no fatigue or smell. But because they have established their relationship with Krishna, they're not interested in enjoying all this facility. So even they have beautiful wives and beautiful. So because of their relationship with Krishna, then everything is secondary. So they don't have much interest in that.
That was really good answer. We're getting more. More is coming. Okay.
If I may, I love stirring these topics.
Such a good story. Such a good question, I've got to say. Yeah.
There is no birth in this spiritual world. That was part of the question. There is no birth. Wherever there's birth, there's death, and there is no death in the spiritual world. So these boys are eternally that age in that relationship with Krishna, and they reciprocate accordingly. In the pastimes we're hearing about here, this is Boma Lila, or Krishna's eternal pastimes in the material world. So this is where it appears that Krishna takes birth, Krishna grows, he grows, Putana, little baby, he grows, the body changes. But this is how you started out your class, which is interesting. I didn't know if it was a rhetorical question or you just didn't want to take it in that direction. But you were saying about eternal time, and yet it's the morning, they're getting dressed, and then there's progression in the day. Yeah. So one of the explanations of its eternal pastimes, whenever that moment, that pastime is finished and it goes to the next variegated blissful pastime, that same pastime is happening in another universe. And when it ends there, that very next moment, it's going to another universe. And Srila Prabhupada used the example of the rising of the sun and crossing across the sky. So that pastime eternally takes place in the material world until the material world becomes unmanifest. And even then, in the holy dhams, they're not of this world. They may be unmanifest, but they're existent. They're spiritually existing, and the pastimes are taking place anyway. So that was an aspect of they are eternally the same in the spiritual world, same age, but the mothers have this sense of them in, the paternal love for them or whatever. And here they get to see it wouldn't make sense to us because we're conditioned to birth, old age, disease, and all that.
Yeah, that's very good. That's back to Prabhupada's purport. He says, also, the idea of being a mother wouldn't exist in this material. Mother in this world means gives birth to you, looks after you in that. But the concept of a mother as being a maternal caring figure is what a mother is. And that exists in the spiritual world, in the mothers of these children, not necessarily the mechanical aspect. Definitely not the mechanical aspect. So that was, those things are cool. I get a bit confused, like when Krishna's pastimes are going from one universe to another, but that's only in the material universe. In the spiritual, in Vrindavan, Golok Vrindavan, they're not going through the material world, so eternal time is happening differently there.
Ever variegated, eternal, pleasurable activities.
Yeah.
The variety is always changing, Sanatana Goswami, you quoted his Bhagavatam10.12.4-5.
Yeah.
He explains that the pastimes will repeat themselves with the assistance of Yoga Maya, where the Lord and his devotees don't remember they've gone through them.
That's right.
And simultaneously, because her curtain can move aside this way or that way, if there is some recollection or sense of deja vu, the Yoga Maya arranges that there'll be detailed differences in each unfolding of the eternal pastime.
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, that's sort of very interesting. And that has to be the case philosophically, because we're trying to understand these things all the time, relating them to our experience. But as Prabhupada says, he explains in that verse, and that goes right through every pastime that we hear about from Vrindavan, that they're not the same, they are on a different category as our experience here of the same sort of things. So that was, thank you very much, everybody. Are we all okay?
We have more questions.
If people want to go for lunch, I find the last question was really well answered. And is she satisfied with the answer? Because it's a very difficult question to answer properly. I think Pankajangripu's answer was that here we have sex for procreation and for pleasure. There, everything is pleasure. So it's done for Krishna's, to make satisfy Krishna somehow or other. I think that was and there's no need for procreation. So there's not much difference between having sex or eating something, but here there's a pleasure coating on everything. I think that was a very good answer. That was, and true as well. That's important.
Last question.
Yeah.
Last question again from Sitala Devi Dasi. So Krishna sent his pure devotees to this material world to assist him to deliver the fallen souls. But all these pure devotees, it seems that they also have to accept birth, old age, disease, and death. And when we see them tirelessly serving the deities and giving classes, our consciousness is purified. At the same time, we feel pain. What shall we do?
Oh, that's a very easy one. That's like the little boy crying when they took the little boy's lunch pack. It's the same one. That's an easy one to do. Because if someone is in love for Krishna, they will take on any difficulty in order to do his service, to please him. So they're not actually, it's not a suffering, it would be suffering for them to not carry out the spiritual master's order. A very good example of this was Vasudev Datta, who had leprosy. I said, the poor man, he's suffering so much. And then they go and see him, a bug would fall off one of his sores, and he'd pick up the bug and put him back because the bug's hungry. An incredible personality. So Vasudev Datta was Brahman Vasudev. Thank you. So he's a very, very good example of someone who was doing exactly what he wanted to do, because he wanted to take all the sins of the world on himself so everyone could go back to Godhead. And the bug would fall off and he'd put the bugs back. He wanted to deliver everyone because he knew that was the desire of Lord Chaitanya. So he thought, this is how I'll do it. And his suffering for him would have been to lose his leprosy. For him to lose his leprosy and to be able to have a nice house, good job, chant his rounds every day, that would have been suffering. So Srila Prabhupada says, a disciple would rather die than fail to execute the order of a spiritual master. So that's a real disciple. So the idea is that if you had, we all know the saying, death before dishonor. You've got immensely proud warriors on the battlefield. And even nowadays in armies, there was the idea of honor in battle. You can't be a coward, you can't run away. So they had this motto. Ordinary mundane soldiers would say, we prefer death to dishonor. But you'd say, that's the same thing with devotees. Prabhupada is saying, a devotee would rather die than fail to execute the order of the spiritual master. But there's no comparison, because on the battlefield, giving yourself death before dishonor, you gain little. But by preferring to die rather than carry out the order of the spiritual master, one gains Krishna. So by the mercy of the Guru, one gets Krishna. Samsara dharvanala lila loka. So these people who are very good devotees working so hard, they are actually in transcendental bliss, but it might not be understood. And Prabhupada has wrote you should never think of the spiritual master as being an ordinary person. And even if you do, you shouldn't voice it. It's a great privilege to be able to give one's life to the service of a bona fide spiritual master, and not everyone gets the opportunity. But it is a life of privilege, and every step you take towards Krishna, Krishna takes 10 steps towards you. So those great devotees have found the way to take 10 steps towards Krishna, and they're very fortunate. So don't feel sorry for them. Feel envious. Is it a question? Yeah.
I'm going to say that so
don't make me more...
people don't misunderstand.
Oh, yeah.
This is an act of service to you. Your purport was spot on. The example, Vasudeva, he's a Brahmin Lord Chaitanya met in his travels of South India.
Okay.
And he had leprosy, and he was so transcendental
that
he would place him back, like you said. When Lord Chaitanya cured him of that, he was afraid he would become puffed up because of his bodily beauty.
Oh.
And that way he was hesitant. He didn't have a desire to accept the blessing that Lord Chaitanya insisted to give him. And Vasudeva Dutt is here in Mayapur, Navadvip Pastimes, with Lord Chaitanya, before. Well, he's here in Mamagachi, his home is there. And he's the one who said, please, my dear Lord, would you allow me to suffer all the sins of all the living entities of this world, and let them go back, and I'll stay and pay the price.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Rajendrananda Prabhu. Thank you, everybody. It's the end of the class. Hare Krishna Pujis. See you later. Hare Krishna. Jai. Hare Krishna. Hard work. I just